Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind is one of my favorite animated movies of all time, and my personal favorite film from Hayao Miyazaki. Yeah, I know he's done spectacular work of higher quality since then, but I don't know, I just feel drawn to this movie more than the others. I love Nausicaa as a protagonist. I find this futuristic world really fascinating. The music by Joe Hisaishi is wonderful. I own the symphony soundtrack on vinyl. And it's still beautifully animated with a lot of unique angles and movement that no animator was trying at the time. But I think another reason I love the movie is because the movie is just the tip of the iceberg. February 1982, the Nausicaa manga was published for the first time in Animage magazine and became an iconic masterpiece. This month marked the 40th anniversary of that beloved story, and I've decided to dedicate this video to it. Not many people outside of Japan realize that Nausicaa started out as a manga, and many people I've talked to believed that the movie was actually an adaptation of the entire manga. But no, Miyazaki started publishing the manga in 1982 and finished in 1994, 12 years later. So if you want to know where Nausicaa's journeys take her beyond the movie, there is 10 years of story left to read. Of course, Miyazaki would take breaks from the manga as animated projects would come up, but still, that's a lot of content. If you want a better comparison, Miyazaki's entire Nausicaa story takes up 7 volumes. The movie covers the first volume and a fraction of the second. More Nausicaa adventures? Yes, please. So in celebration of the manga's 40th anniversary this month, I'd like to take a behind-the-scenes look into how the manga came about and how the movie was made based on various articles and interviews that I've gathered from Japan. Just a heads up, if you haven't read the manga or seen the movie, there will be spoilers. I hope you're looking forward to it as much as I am. So let's get started. On December 15, 1979, Hayao Miyazaki released his feature-length directorial debut, Lupin III: The Castle of Cagliostro. The movie was highly criticized by fans of the franchise, saying that Miyazaki's version of Lupin was too gentle and friendly. The film was a box office disappointment and was a major setback for Miyazaki's career. Nobody felt that he had potential as a director. As a result, for the next few years, Miyazaki was in a bit of a dry spell. Even though I thought it was a waste of time, I didn't get any requests from anywhere, and all the movie plans I put out were turned down. That kind of thing has been going on for the last 3 years, and it's been really hard. But one man named Toshio Suzuki, the editor of Animage magazine, seemed to understand Miyazaki where others did not. After seeing Cagliostro for himself, he offered Miyazaki a chance to produce works for his magazine's employer, Tokuma Shoten. Miyazaki suggested many film possibilities to the staff at the company, but they were all turned down. It was said that in Japan, for every TV anime on air, 60 ideas were rejected. But that number was surely larger for movies. Unless the movie was based on a manga and the manga sold like crazy, or cinema grandmaster Akira Kurosawa was attached in some way, it was likely that the idea would be thrown out. Then, Yutaka Wada, Tokuma Shoten's director of marketing, suggested, well, if there's no original manga, then we just have to make one, right? It was the best solution. Miyazaki would create a story for Animage magazine, and if it was a success, a movie could be possible later on down the road. Miyazaki ultimately agreed, but he had conditions. If he started work on an animated project, the manga series would be put on hiatus. He would draw what he wanted, but the editor could cancel the series if it wasn't popular, and he wouldn't draw it for the sake of making an anime later on down the road. In other words, he didn't want to take the traditional anime style. He wanted to do something different. So different that adapting the story to animation might not be possible. In 1980, Miyazaki was interested in making an animated movie off of the American underground comic Rolf by Richard Corbin, which was first published in 1971. The story focused on a dog who must rescue his owner, Princess Mariara, after she's kidnapped. The comic is filled with many adult subjects, including heavy weaponry and violence. The story of opposites attract was a subject that Miyazaki was fascinated with. He even went as far as to draw concept art for his adaptation with the adult themes dialed down. But the project was scrapped because Corbin had refused to give Miyazaki the rights, and Miyazaki's former employer, TMS Entertainment, was only interested in adapting existing manga titles. So Miyazaki decided to throw some of his ideas for Rolf into his new manga for Tokuma Shoten instead. He even took inspiration from Japanese folk tales, modeling his main character after the princess from the story The Princess Who Loved Insects. The process for this new manga was slow, given that Miyazaki had not drawn a manga since he completed The People of the Desert in 1970. Because of this, the original debut of the manga, which was supposed to be January of 1982, was pushed back 1 month. It's believed that it was by October when Miyazaki had finally come up with the title for his story, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Nausicaa being the name of his main character, named after the Greek princess from the Odyssey. Time was cutting close, but by December of 1981, the first chapter was completed and was ready for publication. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief until they received a phone call from Miyazaki himself, reporting that he wanted to stop the publication. Suddenly, everyone was baffled. Only Miyazaki's editor seemed to know what was going on. Since the summer of 1981, Miyazaki had been working with several other animators on a concept called Sherlock Hound. The project was in collaboration with an Italian public broadcasting company called RAI, but the process was bumpy due to Italy's mail service, plus several creative differences between the Italian and Japanese companies. After months of back and forths, Miyazaki felt that things were finally starting to come together, and that production would start soon. Several Tokuma Shoten staff members, including Toshio Suzuki, rushed to telecom in the Koenji district of Tokyo, where Miyazaki was employed at the time. They tried hard to persuade Miyazaki that stopping the publication now, when it was just about to start, would be a terrible idea. But after an hour of fierce debate, Miyazaki's decision remained unchanged. Finally, the staff members gave up. They had to accept that the manga was dead before it even began. It looked like it really was the end. But then, suddenly, Miyazaki offered an alternative suggestion. If I could do it in pencil, I can draw a lot faster. Seizing the opportunity, the staff members agreed that pencils would be just fine. Everyone, including Miyazaki, went home satisfied that night. The Nausicaa manga was alive again, and premiered in the February edition of 1982. The first chapter mainly focuses on establishing the post-apocalyptic world, the toxic jungle, known in the manga as the Sea of Corruption, and the character of Nausicaa as she finds the shell of an ohm in the forest. The only moment of action is when Nausicaa rescues Lord Yupa from the angry ohm. The moment where Nausicaa reveals her naked face for the first time has become an iconic image for fans. But I have to admit it was a little distracting when I noticed that Miyazaki had drawn Nausicaa with 2 right hands, or left hands depending on how your copy of the manga was printed. The final panel of the first chapter sees Nausicaa taking off into the sky as she flies back to her homeland, the Valley of the Wind. Overall, the first chapter was a nice setup and captured readers' interest moving forward. For the first few months, production for the Nausicaa manga seemed to go at a steady pace. It wasn't until production on Sherlock Hound finally began in late 1982 that Miyazaki started to push himself to his limits. He followed the same basic routine almost every day. Start work on Sherlock Hound at 10 a.m. and head home around 11 p.m. Work on the Nausicaa manga until 5 a.m. before grabbing a few hours sleep and then heading back to the studio when he woke up. At one point, he began suffering from insomnia, but once Sherlock Hound ended, Miyazaki had more time to dish out more pages for Nausicaa. From the very beginning, the Nausicaa manga received huge critical praise, to the point where readers would buy Animage just to read the next chapter of Nausicaa's journey. It was clear that the manga was a success. Because of this, film proposals were tossed around, but the deals either fell through or Miyazaki ultimately declined. Tokuma Shoten did have a film division, but they lacked experience in producing animated projects. But in February of 1983, the company's founder, Yasuyoshi Tokuma, met with the head of a major advertising agency called Hakuhodo. The two agreed to invest in a film adaptation of Nausicaa. One of the reasons the two companies decided to work together was because one of the employees in Hakuhodo's sales division was Shiro Miyazaki, Hayao Miyazaki's younger brother. In April of 1983, It was decided that Toei, Miyazaki's old employer, would be the distributor of the film, and they wanted it to be ready for release by March of 1984. The staff members at Tokuma Shoten had less than 1 year to make a feature-length animated movie off of one of the country's most popular mangas. The staff members called up Miyazaki and asked him if this was possible. Miyazaki did the calculations. For the movie to be ready by March, that would mean that the recordings and dubbings would need to be completed by February, animation done by January, in-betweens finished by December, so at the very latest, he said, animation would have to start by the beginning of August, as well as have half the storyboards completed. The script would need to be done by June, and designs by May, and since it was already mid-April, every second was valuable time wasted. But again, Miyazaki had certain conditions. He must be the director of the film adaptation, Tokuma Shoten must decide on a production studio by mid-May, and the producer must be Miyazaki's longtime colleague and friend, Isao Takahata. Miyazaki and Takahata had known each other since their employment at Toei Animation in the 60s. They collaborated on several projects over the years, including directing the first series of Lupin III together in 1971, after the original director was fired. Miyazaki had worked hard under Takahata's leadership, so it seemed to Miyazaki that it was now time for Takahata to return the favor. When he was approached with the offer, Takahata originally declined, saying that he didn't believe he was suitable to be a producer. After several attempts, Takahata's answer remained unchanged. Upon hearing that Takahata had constantly turned the offer down, it said that Miyazaki and Toshio Suzuki went out to drink. After Miyazaki was intoxicated, he got emotional at one point and blurted out, "I dedicated 15 years of my youth to Paku-san, and this is what I get in return?" Feeling sympathy for Miyazaki, Suzuki decided to go to Takahata's house and try one more time. But before Takahata could refuse, Suzuki shouted, "Miyazaki-san wants you to do this. When your friends are in trouble, don't you help them?" After a moment, Takahata silently nodded and agreed to produce the film. Suzuki would later say that that moment was the only time in his life he ever yelled at Takahata. When he came on board, Takahata explained, "I'm not just praying for him to succeed as a friend. I have this feeling that I want to split the work and share the joy of success again like we have in the past. I don't know if I'll actually be of any use, though." Another reason why Takahata may have taken the role of producer was because he was worried that the staff members at Tokuma Shoten were putting too much responsibility on Miyazaki alone. Though Takahata had never admitted it, many staff members believed that the only reason he took the role of producer was so he could keep an eye on Miyazaki himself. The next obstacle was finding a studio to animate the film. Telecom refused, saying that they couldn't spare the staff since they were working on other projects. TMS Entertainment and Toei Animation also turned the offer down, stating that the tight deadline would be too overwhelming. But when Isao Takahata came on staff, he was able to find a solution. Since this was his first time as a producer, he had to learn the position from scratch. He was able to establish the production system in a unique way that was not bound to the conventional customs and common sense. Finally, by mid-May, a production company was found, Topcraft, the studio that animated the Rankin-Bass Hobbit movie and had just released their latest film, The Last Unicorn. The president of Topcraft at the time was Taru Hara, a former colleague of both Miyazaki and Takahata when they had started out together back at Toei Animation in the 60s. To ease Miyazaki of many burdens as they could, Tokuma Shoten hired Kazunori Ito to write the script. But the draft that Ito ended up submitting was over 3 hours long. Ito would later explain that he didn't believe that the story would work enough to be condensed into a 2-hour film. Because the script was constantly being revised and delayed, Miyazaki had to push forward with the storyboards without it. Unable to keep up with the demands, Kazunori Ito eventually quit the project and Nausicaa pushed forward without a clear ending. The animators had nothing to rely on other than Miyazaki's storyboards alone. Speaking of the animators, they also had trouble adapting the work environment on the project. Some had never worked together before, so it was difficult to become used to each other's work ethics and patterns. In order for the movie to be completed on time, the entire team needed to work with a sense of unity. It's believed that approximately 20 animators began work on the project, and by the time it was finished, over 30 workers were on staff because Miyazaki needed more illustrators to try and get the work flowing faster. One such animator was a man named Hideaki Anno, who specialized in animating machines and effects. As a result, he was put in charge of drawing tanks, as well as the God Warrior sequence at the end of the movie. Miyazaki and Anno became very close friends during production. Over the years, they collaborated on many projects together, and their friendship continues to this very day. One added feature that Miyazaki appreciated was that he was given more time to focus on how life in the valley functioned. It was something that he felt the manga didn't give him time to establish because the story had to keep moving. As the months pressed on, production seemed to be progressing as much as it could, but there was still one minor roadblock. They still had no ending. In the manga where the movie ends, we are instead left with a cliffhanger. Nausicaa mentally communicates with the Ohm. Yeah, that's a thing. And they warn her and the rest of her people to return home while they take care of a problem that is growing in the south. They leave Nausicaa to contemplate what could be going on in the south to worry the Ohm. Since the manga was still ongoing, they had to figure out a way to bring closure to the movie. Isao Takahata and Toshio Suzuki went to a local coffee shop and sat for hours trying to come up with suggestions. They eventually came up with 3 ideas. Have Nausicaa drop down in front of the Ohm Stampede before cutting to the credits. The Ohm Stampede rushing in, Nausicaa is knocked into the air and dies. Or Nausicaa is thrown into the air but comes back to life. With little time to spare, the men settled on the third. At the time, Miyazaki agreed to do it, but in later years, he would say that he felt that the ending was disappointing and that they should have come up with something better. As the deadline drew closer, tensions ran high. Staff members kept getting hired, meaning that they had to readjust their work systems. Employees worked 7 days a week. Miyazaki barely left the studio as well. But even with the process going as it was, Miyazaki finally had to admit that the film was not going to be ready by the release date. When the producers got wind of this, they held a special meeting. Everyone turned to Takahata, hoping for another breakthrough idea. But Takahata only had one thing to say. We have no choice but to delay. It was more important not to lose the quality of the film rather than to have the film finished by the deadline. Everyone, including Miyazaki, was stunned. Though he didn't argue with Takahata on the matter, out of respect for authority, Miyazaki couldn't accept Takahata's solution. He must make the deadline, no matter what. So he began looking for shortcuts. Some crowd scenes became stop pictures, and the battle between Lord Yupa and the Taromikian soldiers was dialed down, making Yupa out to be a little more invincible than originally planned. Hideaki Anno jokingly compared Yupa's fight scene as a fight comically worthy of Goemon Ishikawa from the Lupin III franchise. Through these changes, Miyazaki was able to get back on track. Once the illustrations were finished, it was time to finish up the coloring and work on the dubbing and sound effects. Staff members were being pulled from different departments to help with the process. Sound input, which usually lasted 3 months, was crunched down into 1 week. By this point, production was running 24/7. By the end of February 1984, the movie Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind was finally completed. One question I am often asked is how faithful the movie is to the original source material. Since Miyazaki was the creator of both versions, they expect the movie to be pretty loyal, and it is for the most part. Well, first let me clarify. I haven't read the entire manga yet, but I have read past the point that was adapted for the film. The manga immediately opens up with Nausicaa journeying into the Sea of Corruption, like she does during the opening credits. So the very first scene of the film with Lord Yupa inspecting the dead village was an original scene created as setup for the movie. The biggest difference between the two mediums is the absence of a particular tribe of people and their country. In the manga, it's established very early on that the kingdom of Taromikia is at war with a neighboring country in the south called Dorak. And since the Valley of the Wind is located in Taromikian territory, The valley is bound by an ancient treaty to take up arms and fight for the Taromikian Empire in a declaration of war. But since Nausicaa's father, King Jill, is bedridden, it has fallen to Nausicaa to answer the call to war and represent the valley on the front lines instead. So that's the original reason why she ends up leaving the valley, and not as a Taromikian prisoner of war like in the movie. The Doraks play a key role in the manga when it comes to the story adapted for the film. It's their tribe that ends up kidnapping Nausicaa and Asbel after they leave the Sea of Corruption. And it was the Doraks' plan to use the baby Om in an effort to lead the angry parents on a stampede to attack the Taromikians. In the movie, both of these actions are instead acted out by the people of Pejite in order to attempt to get the God Warrior out of the hands of the Taromikians. The Doraks are never mentioned in the movie, but I have a theory that they are represented by a brand new character made specifically for the film, Obaba. In the manga, the Dorak tribes are led by priests, and the one tribe that captures Nausicaa and Asbel just happens to have a priest that is blind, like Obaba in the movie. And the priest is also the character that ends up reciting the ancient prophecy that Nausicaa is bound to, again, just like Obaba in the movie. Another big difference between the manga and the movie is the inclusion of the God Warrior. While the story of the God Warrior does get the plot moving in both the manga and the movie, the manga takes its time setting up the God Warrior's big reveal, long past the movie's runtime. But since the warrior also sets up the story in the film, which had only a limited amount of time, Miyazaki had to figure out a way to wrap up the story to bring closure to the great beast a lot quicker. That's why Kushana brings the God Warrior in at the end of the movie, and it almost immediately dies. But since the manga had more time, when we see the God Warrior later on down the road, it's at full power. It doesn't even need time to be created. In the manga, when Princess Rastel dies, she gives Nausicaa a special stone that is later revealed to be a key that activates the great beast. To save time, the movie skips over that and just adds the God Warrior as part of the ship's cargo instead. So those are the big changes between the manga and the movie. By March of 1984, the film was promoted and the hype was real. There were even computer games, all designed by Technopolis Soft. Only 3 are known to exist, and they were critically panned for lack of variety, graphics, and constant game crashing. Miyazaki hated the video games and refused to have any of his future movies suffer the same fate. Just before the movie's release, sponsors held a contest to select a Nausicaa image girl for the film. The final contestant would get to sing Nausicaa's theme song, and the recording would be featured in the movie itself. The winner was 18-year-old Narumi Yasuda. However, both Takahata and Miyazaki opposed the singer being featured in the film because they feared that there would be a discrepancy between the contents of the movie and the song. So Yasuda's version of Nausicaa's theme was instead used in the promotional trailers and TV spots. When the Nausicaa movie premiered, Miyazaki was unsatisfied. He said, "I made all the legitimate production procedures for the movie, but I still haven't grasped the theme. Even if I got half a year, I would have only scored 68 points. Takahata was even more disappointed, giving the movie a score of only 30 points. Miyazaki is not just a director, but a writer. So I wanted him to move on to a new horizon. I'm sorry that it's disappointing in the part of reflecting the present from the future." The public, however, thought otherwise. Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind was a huge success. The movie grossed 1.48 billion yen on a 180 million yen budget. Nausicaa was more popular than ever and had a major impact on many rising creative talents. Hiromasa Yonebayashi was inspired to get into animation after seeing the movie when he was 10. Final Fantasy creator Hironobu Sakaguchi credited Nausicaa as one of the key elements that inspired the iconic video game franchise. In 2014, artist Kazuhiko Hachiya designed a real working replica of Nausicaa's wind glider, Mev. And Nausicaa continues to play an important influence in pop culture to this very day. But many fans wonder if Nausicaa herself will ever get a reboot of some kind in the coming years. When asked if he would ever do a sequel to the movie after the original's release, Miyazaki declined, explaining that he didn't even have an ending for the manga, so he had no idea where the character would end up moving forward. To this day, fans continue to hunger for new Nausicaa content, but it seems very unlikely that we will see anything anytime soon. Miyazaki still holds the rights to the story and the character, and he is very protective of them, turning down several film offers, including from Hollywood. He did eventually give permission for a kabuki play to be made in 2019, but that's about it. Hideaki Anno has also expressed interest on making a live-action movie on Nausicaa at some point in the future. Though Miyazaki hasn't officially given him permission, it sounds like Anno is the only person that Miyazaki would trust with his baby. I don't feel like doing it, but Anno keeps saying, "I want to do it, I want to do it." So I tell him, now that I've come to think lately, if he wanted to do it, it would be fine for him to do it. But with Anno's new movie, Shin Kamen Rider, set to be released in 2023, it seems that Anno has his hands full at the moment. So while it doesn't look like a new Nausicaa movie is right around the corner, the original movie and the manga seem to satisfy fans enough for now. Despite Miyazaki's feelings towards the film, knowing the stress of the production that went into making the film in such a short time frame just makes me have more respect for the film itself. Anno once said that he felt that Miyazaki's greatest accomplishment was the Nausicaa manga, and while I'm not sure I would actually agree with that since I haven't finished the manga yet, I do agree that the manga and the movie opened several doors for Miyazaki that the castle of Cagliostro had closed at the time. I personally think he would not be where he is today if this franchise had not given him the boost he needed. The fact that people still cherish it to this very day speaks volumes about what Miyazaki created so long ago. Happy 40th birthday, Nausicaa, and here's to your legacy lasting for years to come. Guys, thank you so much for continuing to watch and support my videos. As always, it really means a lot. And if you want to hear me talk more about Nausicaa, you can check out my original review, as well as my review for Warriors of the Wind, the first failed attempt to bring Nausicaa to the US, both here on my channel. Thanks again, guys, and if you like this, you can click here and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.